From 1880 to 1920, a flood of more than 20 million immigrants transformed the United States from a rural farming society to an industrial economy centered in large cities. The Irish, recently recovered from the potato famine, were followed by waves of Italians fleeing poverty in newly unified Italy. By 1880, the homes and boarding houses of these recent immigrants had transformed Dogpatch, which was then known as a part of the Potrero, from an open landscape of shrubs and serpentine rock into an industrial center with workers' homes nearby. The demolition of Irish Hill, which Stephen told you about earlier, signaled industrial expansion in Dogpatch, and they needed more homes for workers. Builders looked up to the hills above Dogpatch, what today we call Potrero Hill. Developers and residents asked the city to rename all of the Potrero Southern Heights, which sounded more refined. Those real estate brokers, you know. Potrero, after all, meant pasture. Both Potrero and Southern Heights continued to be used, and now all that's left of Southern Heights is that 2-block avenue next to the neighborhood house. In 1881, the Southern Heights Improvement Club asked the city for a water reservoir and fire alarms, and they contemplated a 2-cow limit on residents. They're right at that limit. The neighbors would continue asking for that water service for 30 more years. Because Potrero Hill itself is a huge mass of serpentine rock, the neighborhood wasn't badly affected by the 1906 earthquake, and we were lucky that the more destructive fires never reached the hill. This undamaged neighborhood attracted lots of folks. In 1907, a newspaper article announced Potrero making large strides and stated, "No section of San Francisco has made greater strides forward in the last few months so far as growth of population is concerned than the Potrero, and no part of the Potrero has grown so rapidly as Southern Heights. 3 months ago, this great hummock, which overlooks the city and bay in every direction, was used only to graze cows upon. Now several hundred homes are sprinkled over its sides, and hundreds of others are in the course of construction." This exploding residential building boom on the hill above Dogpatch explains why in 1912, St. Teresa's School and Convent was built at Pennsylvania and 19th, and why in 1924 the church was cut in two, as Stephen described, and dragged up the hill to where we are now. The move transformed what had been a predominantly Irish congregation in Dogpatch into a predominantly Italian one, but the new congregation also included Irish, Scotch, Slavonian, and Hispanic congregants. Much of the large Russian Potrero Hill population attended the Russian Molokan Church. St. Teresa's School served mostly Italian, Irish, Slavic, and Hispanic children, and then African American children who came with their families during World War II when war-related industries were booming. Daniel Webster and Patrick Henry schools also served Potrero Hill children since the early 1900s. I was really excited to find this picture in the collection of the Archdiocese. You can just see St. Teresa's school peeking behind a brown shingle building, which was the nurses' settlement, which has a whole history. It was founded by a really cool woman named Octavine Briggs, who had a settlement house south of Market that was burned down in 1906. And she had wealthy friends who she gathered and had this nurses' settlement built just to the south of St. Teresa's Church. And it was in this building that the Potrero Hill Women's Club was founded in 1908. The Women's Club is still moving forward and is looking for members. The Women's Club opened the first Potrero Hill Library later that year. The Italian community on Potrero Hill was very proud of its vegetable gardens and winemaking and cooking. Here, Rosemary Osler operates a wine press in her basement, which is a scene familiar to many longtime residents. In some basements, there are cement channels for moving the wine around. And here, her father tends the family fig tree. The Alioto family used this stone mortar and wooden pestle for grinding their garlicky pesto. Since the 1880s, Italians had farmed thousands of acres along the city's southern border. The first Italian-American Friendship Society was built in the Excelsior district, I was surprised to find, not North Beach. And they harvested watercress, and they ran dairies on the shore of Islas Creek. Here's a map of milk dealers in the city from 1880 to 1900. On Missouri Street, the Monte Cristo Club brought and continues to bring the Italian community together for dinners, dances, and at one time they held bocce ball tournaments in the club's interior, which is surprisingly large. 100 years ago, in 1912, a flower market was formed by Japanese and Italian growers who joined forces. That market, now at 6th and Brandon Street, will soon come to Potrero Hill. A new home for the San Francisco Flower Market is under construction and will open in about a year at 17th and Mississippi in remodeled buildings once owned by the Pacific Rolling Mill, the first. Yay! The first steel and iron foundry in the West, founded in 1866. Old-timers I've talked to always describe Potrero Hill as a classic American melting pot, a place where many nationalities got along well, and a neighborhood so safe that front doors were often left unlocked. But nationally, it was a very different picture. Urbanization had a downside. Poverty, crime, disease, and competition for jobs, which were blamed by much of the white Protestant majority on immigrants, who were also seen as harbingers of socialism, communism, anarchism, challenging the nation's identity. Does this sound familiar? A backlash of nativism followed, which we see repeated today in ugly stereotypes of people of color and a resurgence of anti-Semitism. Sadly, it seems that anti-immigrant prejudice and racism are as American as apple pie. In 1914, Stanford economics professor Edward Ross stated, "Italians are inherently prone to crime, Slavs innately servile, and Jews crafty businessmen with a passion for Gentile girls." In 1915, the Panama Pacific Exhibition in the Marina District celebrated the opening of the Panama Canal, and one of the most popular exhibits at that fair was the Race Betterment Foundation's booth, which won a bronze medal for illustrating evidences and causes of race degeneration and methods and agencies for race betterment. The foundation was founded by serial tycoon John Kellogg, and it grew out of the eugenics movement, a junk science promoting the idea that Nordic races were genetically and morally superior, basically white supremacy. Eugenics categorized other races as social inadequates. Eugenics was a primary weapon to keep immigrants out of the country, making that point of view acceptable because it was supposedly scientific. Incidentally, alumni and students from the Potrero's Lick and Lux schools came to the fair and would have visited the race betterment booth. Lick Wilmerding was at the site of the current UPS building, and you'll see Lux a little bit later. A mural from that exposition was given to the Lux School for Girls, which was then in a building you will recognize. Now it's home to the Buddhist Soka Gakkai International Organization above the Shell Station at 17th and Potrero, and that mural is still there. I was familiar with the long histories of prejudice against Native Americans, blacks, and Jews, but when I saw this book of dialect recitations intended to be jokes, I was shocked. Even in the 1930s and later, it was acceptable to ridicule Italian, Irish, Dutch, Scotch, black, and other people who were not considered white enough. Eugenics was even supported by Theodore Roosevelt and Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood. And it even helped inspire the Nazi ideology of racial hygiene with tragic results. In 1924, the year St. Teresa's Church moved to 19th Street, Congress passed the Johnson-Reed Act, setting quotas on immigration, a policy that would stay in effect for 40 years. Immigration from Asia was completely prohibited, and from Europe drastically reduced. In just 1 year, Italian immigration plummeted from 220,000 to under 4,000. I knew that 125,000 Japanese were forcibly relocated during World War II, but the restrictions and relocation of 10,000 Italians on the West Coast was completely unfamiliar to me until I heard about it from longtime Potrero Hillers we will hear from. These government policies included confiscation of radios, 8 p.m. curfews, and for over 400 Italians, internment, some at this camp nearby in Pacifica at Sharp Park. This little-known history has come to be known as una storia segreta, a secret history. Now we'll see a video of Regina North, who sits next to her mother, Josephine Alioto. Josephine is 101 years old, and she spoke at History Night several years ago about tending her family goat on 20th Street at 20th and Carolina. And those goats' footprints were made in wet cement, and you can find them in front of Goat Hill Pizza, where we've installed them. Regina will tell us how these World War II policies affected her Italian family.
We're going to talk about my grandfather, Calogero or Carlo Alioto, and his wife Vincenzina Alioto. They were first cousins. And I'm going to tell you this information because it becomes important a little bit later, but her mother was a Buzzolacchi, his mother was a Tarantino, and their in-laws were Balistreri. So it's kind of the story of 4 interconnected families. My grandfather was a fisherman. He came over in 1911 and went to Milwaukee first. Many of them went to Milwaukee first, but eventually ended up in San Francisco. He worked for International Fish, which was Mayor Alioto's father's company. The original 6 Alioto brothers owned fishing companies. So my grandfather, who is right there, and a couple of his relatives fished for International Fish. Eventually, he purchased his own boat in partnership with Tom Lazio, who was the Alioto brothers' brother-in-law. So Grandpa and Tom Lazio had a boat together. when World War II broke out, or actually I should say when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and President Roosevelt decided to join the war effort, the fishing privileges were immediately revoked for all Italians who did not have American citizenship. So government came around, they impounded his boat, and they used it as a minesweeper in the bay. So my grandfather lost his boat. He had the MPs come to his house. They took away his shortwave radio. He had no means of support now of a family with 8 children. And this story is multiplied by the dozens and dozens and dozens. At the end of the war, the government offered to my grandfather to buy back his boat. They took it away, and now they wanted him to buy it back. He hadn't worked in 4 years. He had no money to pay for this boat. It was trashed, and you'll hear that story over and over again. The boats that were taken and used as minesweepers were badly, badly damaged by the military. So his partner, Tom Lazio, ended up buying the boat back and moved it up to Northern California, Mendocino or Humboldt, somewhere up in the northern. That was the end of the boating. He never fished again.
By the 1930s, St. Teresa's congregation included between 400 to 500 families. In 1932, a fire damaged the church, and the older Irish families are said to have rallied with the newcomers, Italians and Slavonians, to restore the church and build a 14-room parish residence at 19th and Missouri. In 1934, a movie of an impressive Saints' Day procession starting and ending at St. Teresa's Church honored Saint Vincenza of Croatia, who was a 3rd century Christian martyr. The movie was made specifically to be shown in a small movie theater on Connecticut Street called the New Potrero, but known in the neighborhood as the Nick or the Flea House. And today that's home to the San Francisco Gurdjieff Society. We're going to see part of a film that gives us a rare look at our neighborhood in the 1930s along Missouri, Connecticut, and 20th Street. It will be narrated by Mary Petkovich Berelich, who is a child in that movie.
Following the movie, pictures are shown. Well, the New Potrero Theater management agreed to show the movie for the people in the Potrero district, and that's why they have this little announcement first that it is a community service and it wasn't shown in any other theater in San Francisco. And this is the St. Vincenza M for Martyr Club Feast Day procession, and this one happens to be in 1937. Now there's St. Teresa's Church there. It was a windy day, as you can see. And they're exiting church. There was a mass first, and everyone was in the mass, and that floral arrangement represents sort of like a funeral piece, which was put at the during the mass. They put it in front of the flag, since the body of Saint Vincenza was over in Yugoslavia, and that's Father Hevron John Hevron was pastor then, and his assistants were Father Patrick O'Rourke and Father James O'Connell, and they're taking the host around, and there's the San Francisco police finest on their horses, and those horses sure impress me because I'm riding to this day at 71 years of age. Aren't they beautiful? They're handling those horses quite well in the wind and on the cobblestone. And that's the San Francisco Municipal Band. The San Francisco County, they just showed up for us. My dad was influential in arranging for that. And so you'll notice the men are marching first, And some of the men in there, I was, 9 or 10 then, so I don't remember them all, but those that I recognized were, of course, my dad, Jerry Petkovich, and his brother, John, and my cousin, Mario Petkovich, and there was Martin Demyanovich, and Tony Separovich, George Bassich, John Prismich, Victor Brain, Maureen Schmader, and Tony Separovich. Tony Separovich worked for the city and county, and he was quite a character. And he was able to arrange for a lot of permission to walk the streets. And notice the cobblestone. Now comes the women. The women march separately from the men. I don't think that would happen today.
People look very well dressed.
They were. We would never go downtown without a hat and gloves. And we were brought up to be ladies. Now that's Agnes Boamini and Mary Separovich there next to the wreath. And this is a little St. Teresa schoolboys there.
Are people dressed up specially for the parade, or is this typical?
Well, that was typical Sunday dress. Well, now the white dresses and the little communion dresses were special for the parade. Now that's my sister and I believe Agnes Tulich. Just a little communion. Now that's Father O'Rourke there, Patrick O'Rourke. He was very, very much a favorite then, and that's Father James O'Connell. He was a very gentle person. And then the canopy is a church thing that goes over the host as they're walking down the streets. Now this is the Cortula, San Francisco branch of the Cortula Club. And Cortula is the whole island. Blata is a village on the island. These are little boys coming, St. Teresa's boys coming out, and then this particular portion of the movie was in 1932.
Were there many?
The ladies all had furs on their coats.
Were there many nationalities who attended church?
Oh, yes. There was the Irish, the Scotch, the Italians, Spanish, and Mexican, and the Slavic people.
How?
There was never any, you're Irish, I'm Slav. You were just a Potrero Hill resident. And here comes the man again, separately. Now that building over in the corner is no longer there. That's a lot. But that was Dr. Jean Cantu's office. And his little French mother lived downstairs. She didn't speak English. She only spoke French. And he was the dentist in the area until Dr. White came on 18th and Missouri Street. You notice the little boys are just playing around, and this is the Italian Catholic Federation Drum Corps. We were so impressed with their precision in those days. We thought, oh my, I wanted to play the drums after I saw that. But I chose first to ride horses.
Were there many cars in the neighborhood at this time?
Not too many. You see more than we saw on that day. They came from the Mission District to see the parade, and there's my dad with the palm in front of the band there. And pretty soon you'll see behind the flag, there I am, the first one walking by. Can't believe it. There's a little glitch there in the film. But you notice the ladies all had nice coats on. They were nicely dressed, and a lady carrying her baby. And the cobblestones, too. And they weren't easy to walk on. They were very slippery. And the little Catholic schoolgirls in their uniforms. And the boys, the pranksters. Even the altar boys were having fun. This is the panorama. The two queens there next to the flag were Catherine Prismich and Catherine Millet. And there I am with the crown hanging down over my nose. And all the little girls were from the families of the members of the St. Vincenza Society. And they're going back again. You did a pretty good job at movie making for that time. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Mary.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome, Peter. I hope this helps you out.
During this time, St. Teresa's was where first communions and weddings, this is a wedding in Margaret Rice's family. That's Margaret Rice in the middle, the tall woman in the dark coat. This is Josephine Alioto's wedding. You saw her with her daughter earlier. And this is Josephine and her husband coming back to St. Teresa's celebrating a wedding anniversary. Of course, baptisms, funerals, and holiday celebrations took place here in a church which had been redecorated after the move, and it included at one time a mural of St. Teresa in the dome above the altar. Much different look than today. All that I see, that frieze is all that's left of that painting. When the church was remodeled, many of the original pews were given to church members, and this one belongs to Epic Perea, who you met earlier and who you will see again. Church groups included the Ladies' Auxiliary, the Young Men's Institute, the Italian Catholic Federation, the Catholic Youth Organization, and school groups, including St. Teresa's Guild, held picnics and boxing matches between this school and other schools here in the church basement. They also held whist benefits. And they held extremely popular festivals in the large hall under the church. St. Teresa's church and school are extremely vivid in the memories of many longtime Potrero Hill residents, and you're going to meet several of them now who generously contributed to tonight's program. You will meet, left to right, Epic Perea, Mary Law, and Joan King, and Tom Hurley, Margaret Rice, and you've already met Tom McGarvey.
I came into San Francisco in 1946. My father's name was Dan Perea, and my mother's name was Eloisa Perea, and we came to live on Potrero Hill. When I came to St. Teresa's, I was already an altar boy in Soledad, California. So when I came, I started, my mother used to come to Mass every day. So she noticed there wasn't any altar boy at the time, so she told me to go see Father Lynch and see if I could be an altar boy during the daily Mass. And being active with all the people coming into Potrero Hill, St. Teresa Church became very active. Especially on Sundays, during the Mass and all that. We had 3 priests that said Mass on Sundays, and at some times we had 5 Masses on Sundays. And then down, right around the corner, on Connecticut Street, we have the middle door, we have the backbone of St. Teresa's, and that's our hall. We had several activities. We had the bazaar. The bazaar was one of the favorites of the parishioners and all that. But the most favorite was the students at St. Teresa's, because that, on the Friday they were able to come on during school time and go down and play the roulette tables and all that. And then on that same weekend, on Saturday night, we had what they call casino night. You had the roulette tables, you had the dice machines, you had the slot machines and all that, and it was a great activities and all that. So that ran during the weekend. But they had such a beautiful view, St. Teresa's School. They could look throughout the whole Bay Area and all that. And right down between Mariposa and 16th Street and 4th Street, there was the Southern Pacific Yard down there. That section on 4th Street was where I lived at for 2 years. And what they call a mail car. My father was a extra gang foreman, and we traveled back and forth down the peninsula to fix the railroad track when they needed it and all that. And but then they needed repair, so they stationed us down at 4th and King Street down there, 4th and 16th Street where we were at, and we were on there for 2 years. My father got so involved with the school, and so did my mother and all that the sisters liked to go to the farmer's market. And my father says, I'll take you. And they said, oh, fine. So you think you have cell phones or anything like that? When they had to go to the farmer's market, they would go up to the roof and they would raise up a flag. And my father would look out every Saturday morning and he would say, goodbye. So there you would go. And not only take them to the farmer's market, but if they had any other places that they needed to go for some reason or the other, that's how they communicated. And every day before he go to work, he'd look up at the St. Teresa School.
How would you describe the church community that you grew up in to people that have no idea?
Well, part of it would be, it was really a community. Like Father Greenwald keeps saying, we're family and stuff like that. But in those days, I mean, we try to be a family now, but in those days it really was a family. We didn't, I really didn't know as many people on the other side of the church. Because it's kind of like, a lot of it is that the people that were from, as we said, the hill part, from Connecticut Street over to Rhode Island or wherever, would sit on one side of the church, and then the people that came from the other side, from Missouri Street over, they would sit on the other side of the church. And I guess it was just the way you walked in. You came in front of the church and you walked in the door, and wherever you that was where you sat. And I know we sat in the same pew for forever. And of course, in those days, we didn't lock our front doors. So if, he'd ring the doorbell, and if nobody answered, then he'd come right in. And my father always had a bottle of bourbon. I guess it was bourbon in those days. It was a special place under the sink, and that was reserved for Father Flynn. And so Father could come in and have a drink. I don't know how many times he did that, but I know it was, because if my parents were here, either one of them were here, and he came in, they'd always offer him a drink, and he'd usually have one, but he didn't just sit and visit. So he was quite friendly, and I'd say mostly well liked. We were kind of, when we were kids, we were kind of afraid of him, but now I can see where there wouldn't be any reason to be afraid of him. I say, except maybe giving out the report cards. Let's see, I had Sister Beatrice in the first grade, and I think she was the one which impressed me. They say now, about 30 children is all that a teacher should be able to handle, whereas in our class, we were probably the class at the end of, the end of the Second World War. So we had a lot of kids from that were, I think they lived, a lot of them lived out at Hunters Point, and that was Navy housing at the time, and it was let's say, so 50 kids, and she had us, each of us, or if our parents could do it, bring extra pair of socks. And because on rainy days, most of us didn't have galoshes because the rubber was so hard to get during the Second World War that you had to, you didn't have them, so you had wet feet. So Sister Beatrice would have the kids all of us take off our shoes and socks, and she'd take them down to the furnace room, which was down in the basement, and she'd dry them, and then be somewhere along during the day when they were dry, she'd bring them back up, and we'd put our shoes and socks back on, and I think we'd probably take our extra pair of socks home and have them washed and then bring them back next day or so for the next time it rained. And
Were any of the nuns particularly strict? I mean, you hear...
oh yes, we had Sister Thomasine. Well, Sister Carmel was strict, and she was my third grade teacher. But Sister Thomasine, well, if anybody that went to St. Teresa's during those years knew Sister Thomasine. We had, our desks had ink wells in them, though we didn't have ink, but they had ink wells, and they were removable. And so this one boy that sat behind me quite a few times, because we were both pretty short, and he would tie I had long curls, and he'd tie my curls to the inkwell. And so then when I'd get up, I'd have this inkwell and be with me. Of course, then I'd probably start screaming or doing something that would get everybody's attention, and he'd get in trouble and until he did it the next time. I say in the second grade, we had Sister Helena, and what I remember was a couple of times, I don't know, we had some sort of a picnic or something like that, and boy, she was a good baseball player. She would get out there, and especially batting. I can remember her with that bat, and she'd kind of pull up her skirts when she had to run, but she'd do that. And then third grade with Sister Carmel, who was quite strict, and again, something that they wouldn't do now is to hit your knee across the knuckles with a ruler. But I don't think she ever, I know she didn't ever do that to me.
Going to church on Sunday, going to confession on Saturday, that was a trip too. I remember going down and on my way down the hill, trying to think of some sins I might have committed that I had sometimes made them up because I really was a pretty good kid. So it was important. It was important to the community. The fall festivals they had were wonderful. The old wheels that they'd spin, and you'd get a prize based on what, came up. And the ladies in the church all made items to be sold, tablecloths and oven mitts and all handmade types of things, and cakes. They had, cake sales, and it was fun.
Tell me about your marriage at St. Teresa's.
It was a beautiful wedding. I mean, it was very typical of the time, and bridesmaids and flower girls, and very nice. It didn't last, but
They don't all.
no. Yeah, I spent my life on the hill. The hill in those days was really a city within a city. We were separated by both freeways, and many people in the city didn't really know we existed over here. I mean, they didn't come over here. We were our own identity over here. So I think that's interesting, and it's one of the unusual things in the city. And still, I think we are more of a neighborhood and community than many other places in San Francisco. I think that's all kind of gone away, and I think that we've stayed a community. Yeah, they used to do a lot of senior citizen type of things, and that was one of the things they did. And my mother-in-law, who also moved up on the hill after we got married, so she was active in the church, and she used to go when all the little old ladies would go to Reno and spend one night and come back on the bus. And so they chartered the bus for their group of people who went.
To gamble, I guess.
To gamble, absolutely.
Nothing else
absolutely.
to do.
Oh, yeah, play the slot machines. They saved their coins. Yeah. Really, it was fun. Actually, I think they used to serve drinks on the bus driving up. So all these little old ladies were a little tipsy by the time they got up there.
Do you remember wine making on the hill?
I do. One of my very best friends was Italian, and her father made wine every year. He had his grapes delivered, and he had the huge vats in his cellar, and I remember us sneaking down when we were teenagers for, God, it was awful stuff. I mean, it was just, very rich and very hearty. So, yeah, and that was very common on the hill in the Italian community.
When you were growing up and people heard that you lived in the Potrero, what did that mean?
Well, my guys, like in high school, they were afraid of us because they said, we were all the tough guys, man. We were the guys that didn't mess around. And you get a reputation, the Potrero Hill. Oh, God, you live in the Potrero. Until people get over here, As you well know, this is the best neighborhood in San Francisco.
Tell me about the early days, your early days going to St. Teresa's church and school.
Well, it was right up the hill from me up here. It's apartment buildings now, but it used to be right about 2.5 blocks from my house here. And the presentation nuns were teachers there. And we had a nun in every class. We had no lay persons. I didn't get them until I went to the school later on. But they were all nuns, and they taught us, and we got a very good education. Got a very good education by them. Thank God that they had that deal to become a nun, because I think we paid, $6 or something to go to school there, and it wasn't very much at all. And the nuns lived right there, right in the school above, and we used to go up to church. They would march us all up the hill and over the hill down to St. Teresa's up here. And on the first Fridays, I remember that, we used to go down, and then we used to have donuts. We had a good bakery right down on 18th Street, 18th in Connecticut. They're a real good bakery, and they baked all the sugar and glazed donuts, and we had hot chocolate and that after the Mass. Then we went back to school. So that's one memory I have of St. Teresa's. But it was a working class school up here. The people that lived up here, they worked for various organizations in the neighborhood. They didn't commute like people today do all across. They worked for the can company. They worked on the waterfront. They worked in the milk business, delivering milk. I know. Clean clothes for all the restaurants and all that. They worked for laundry services. They had everybody came out of there, had pretty good jobs.
How did the church function as a community center in those days?
It was far more then than it is today. It was very centered with everybody, Like we used to go around, I don't know what faith you are here like this, but on Good Friday, we would get in a priest's car and drive all around the neighborhood to all the bars and give them a sign, closed for the 3 hours, from noon to 3. They closed. And right down here, the bars on 18th Street, the bars down on 3rd Street and all that, you couldn't get a drink. Oh. And so they had a lot more influence than they have today, I could say.
It sounds like the nuns had a pretty hard time. I mean, they didn't have much money, and
well, they didn't have much money and stuff like that, but they had their students. Like one nun says, "Geez, I got my boys," and we were her boys. And a lot of guys maybe went into they worked for a produce market or something like that, and they would come by a couple of times a week and drop off produce to them. Other ones, butchers, give them a deal on that. So people sort of took care of each other. That's what I could say about that. I knew that too. I knew that because I seen them do it,
Did the church have bazaars going on?
Oh yeah, we had wonderful bazaars and wonderful Italian food, and geez, just great characters that used to work. The Italian American League, I guess, from our church, they used to have a booth, and they would yell, "Come on over, you cheapskate! Put down a nickel!" And Geez, I would come home with a big salami. God, it worth more than a nickel.
At St. Teresa's church and school, did they have boxing?
Yeah, we had boxing, and the boxing ended in probably about 1957 or 50, because we had a priest here that was really interested in it, and he kept it going. And so we would fight kids from other clubs from 24th Street, the boys club down there. They would come over. Columbia Park Boys was a real big one.
And you would fight in the...
Right down underneath the church there in the hall. Right in the hall there, all those things are going. I can remember like it was yesterday, yep.
Seems weird. That wouldn't happen today, I don't think.
Well, San Francisco at that time, we were a real boxing town. We had world champions come out of here.
What did the church bring to the Hill in?
Well, it brought stability to the Hill, I think. A lot of things, people would, the bell would ring and people would go to church. They would go to the bazaars. They would go to the things that they sponsored. They didn't have a lot of things, but they were big influence, much more influence then than they are today. Very big influence on the Hill. The priests walked around, they mixed with everybody. One priest, we had Father Lynch up there, and he was known to have a drink or two as an Irishman, and he would go down to the bars like this, and as a Catholic priest, he's there in his collar, and he's at the bar having a drink. Most of his people there were all from up here. I don't think he ever paid for one in his life. But Potrero Hills were a really great place, and St. Teresa's school, a lot of us made a living and enjoyed retirement because of the education we got there. That's all I can say about the school. I thought it was a wonderful school.
It was like a little town. Everybody knew everybody else. You didn't do anything when you were a child, because when you got home, your mother already knew it. And you thought she had eyes in the back of her head. How did she find out? That telephone tree was there. You just better not do anything that you shouldn't have done. And how fabulous that was, that no matter where you went, you were welcome. We went to the 9 o'clock Mass every Sunday, and at Christmas we went to midnight Mass. I remember that midnight Mass very well. Father Lynch was saying Mass. My son was the altar boy. Everybody left church, and my son is still there. He'd look around and, start to get up. Father Lynch would put his hand on his shoulder. We didn't get home until 3 on that Christmas Eve. There was something about the church for me. There was our Father O'Rourke. He had a double confessional. The other 2 priests didn't have anybody. They would come out and say, "Come over here." He had both sides. Lines of people would want to go to Father O'Rourke. So that shows you what rapport he had with us. Why would I remember such a thing? Yes, Mama took her wedding gown and made our communion dresses. How she ever had the nerve to cut up her dress like that. But that's what they did. And she was an excellent seamstress, such a good cook that, what was his name? A fireman that lived next door to us came and told me before I lived there. They would visit my mother and father on Pennsylvania Street. Tell his son, "Come on, we'll go. Mr. Blair will give us a glass of homemade wine." But they went near lunchtime, and he said, "And Mrs. Bolero will ask us to stay for lunch." And we were poor. We were like 13 or 14 people living in that house. Oh, the Monte Cristo Club was a place that these men went to, mostly the garbage men, the Sicilians that went to the Monte Cristo when they were off. My brother-in-law Sam belonged to them, and for a few years we had a women's club that would go once a month and have dinner. Fabulous meals. Those men could cook.
What was that school like?
Oh, we had the nuns. It was tough. Sure, it was tough. Sure. I can tell you stories about one time I went to, you know, they had what they cloakroom. You know, it was a separate room. You ever hear what they call something a cloakroom? Yeah, separate room where people come in there and put their galoshes and their stuff and their lunches and coats and hats and everything in there. Well, one time I was probably shooting spitballs at the girls or some fucking thing, and I got caught, so they locked me in there, right? Well, they never locked me in there again, because when I went in that fucking cloakroom, I was hungry. So what did I do? I ate about 4 lunches in there. That belonged to somebody else. Then the teacher brought me up in front of the goddamn class, me and another guy. He happened to be a big millionaire too. And she says, hey, you see these 2 hoodlums there? These 2 guys will never amount to anything. Well, we happen to be the 2 most successful guys in the class. Well, like I say, the tuition was $1 a month, and naturally I couldn't afford $1 a month. So in those days, they had an old stove in there, coal-burning stove, you see, but it had a small entrance where you put the coal in. And the West Pacific Railroad, they used to donate the coal to the school. That's how things worked in those days. So anyway, what I did, me and my brother and sisters, we'd go up there and we'd break the coal down so you could get it in the boiler, you see. And then in the summertime, we'd go up there and the nuns they had the presentation nuns up there, you see. And they were strict as the son of a gun, you know, as smart as a whip, and they lived right in the building, you know. So anyway, we would go up in the summertime then, and we'd clean the yards up where they grew a bunch of flowers and stuff like that and everything. We'd clean up the yards and all the time. That's how we paid our tuition. We had no money. The kids in those days, the street there, which is Pennsylvania there, that's between 19th and 20th. That's where it is. So what they did, they had like a frame with a rope over here and a rope on this side here. And when you went out for recess or for lunch, they blocked the street off. The street was used for our playground. We played on the street. There was a very small yard in there, very small. But most of the boys and most of the people played on the street there. So we played handball out there, hit it on the side. There was a cement wall over there, we played handball there. And then they'd play a game of what they call Cross the River, you know. And that would be, you know, guys would be in the middle of the street and you'd have to run across, and the idea was to block you from getting over there. You see, they call it Cross the River. Then after school, you know, a lot of kids, they had little chores to do around the house. Well, I was either selling magazines. I sold a Liberty magazine, and I sold a Saturday Evening Post. I shined shoes, and I sold the San Francisco News, the Call Bulletin, you know.
Beginning at what age?
7, yeah. Because, you know, my father and mother woke us up, and we had to get up, and I'd sell papers before I went to school in the morning. I'd go down to Sea Island Sugar, which was down off of 3rd down there, and it was at the foot of 24th. Sea Island Sugar down there, and there was a plant down there, and there'd be probably 200 people come in there. Well, I get down there when they come to work. You see, they come to work there at 8 o'clock. So I'd be down there at 7:30 with my magazines, selling them right in front there, you see, and then I'd get out of there about 8:30, then I'd run home, and then I'd go to school. So that would be magazines. And then in the afternoon, then I'd have to sell papers. And in those days, when you made any money, you see, that money wasn't yours. You had to turn it into the house. That belonged to the parents. You didn't figure it was your money. It belonged to the house. You turned to the home. Okay, St. Teresa's Church. So what they did, they picked out so many kids out of each class, and what they would do, they would take maybe 3 or 4 out of each class, and they'd take you in a recreation room that we had in there. And what they would do is, they would test you out, and they would pick certain ones out of that. And then, if they didn't get enough, they would bring other kids in. And I happened to get involved in going in that there. So they picked me out. And I don't know, we had probably about 15 in the choir. But anyway, I never forgot this guy's name, Hutchins. And he was the boss, and he ran a choir, and he ran a good ship. And he'd come over to the school, and then on Sunday, you go up to church, and you had to go up there.
Where did you sing?
You sang, there was a stairway, as you go into church, it winds around like this here, where you pull a bell around it there. You had a sneaky stairs, and there was a stage up there, like, so you was way up high if you look at the church, and you was looking down, and we'd sing up there. Once in a while, people call me up, and they can't afford to hire somebody to sing, you know, Danny Boy, and some people want Danny Boy, so it's very hard to find people that can really sing Danny Boy. It's a long song, it's drawn out, and usually Irish people are, they call that the funeral song for the Irish, you know what I mean, Danny Boy, and a lot of people, maybe they can't afford it, because a singer, when he comes in now, he wants $300. You know what I mean? And it's hard to find a guy that can sing Danny Boy, and then if you do find one, he wants $300. So I sang at 3 or 4 different ones, and I didn't charge him anything, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go around town and do it. But for somebody that was up against it, I don't mind doing it, you know? And that's what it is. But Danny Boy is a tough song to sing, and that's what I did, you know. So anyway, you want me to sing the song now? Okay. My name isn't Bing Crosby anyway, but I'll sing the song for you, and I hope you appreciate it. Anyway. Oh, Danny Boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. Summer has come, and all the roses are falling. Says you, and I shall make a bite. But coming back when summer's in the meadows, or when the valleys touch and white with snow, yes, I'll be there in sunshine or in shadows. Oh, Daddy boy, I love you so. And when he comes, and all the flowers are dying, if I am there, as that I well may be, you'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an Ave there for me, and I shall hear the soft dew tread upon me, and my wave will warmer, sweeter be, if you will bend and tell me that you love me, then I shall rest in peace until you come then I shall rest in peace until you come to me.
Beautiful.
That's a song. It's a beautiful song. And they're all crying in it. Don't kid yourself. They're all crying when they hear the song.
We want to thank you all for coming tonight, and if you'll help with the chairs, we'd appreciate it. And remember to turn your clocks back 1 hour. Thank you.